we don't put it on our balance sheets as businesses, but security is an asset or a liability on that balance sheet. And all those vulnerabilities that aren't fixed are really, you could convert them to dollars and put them as a liability. Welcome, everybody, to yet another episode of How Many CTOs Does It Take? Today, my name is Scott Porad. It's always Scott Porad, and I'm with my trusty co-host,
Brad Hefta-Gaub, who sometimes is Brad Hefta-Gaub.
Correct. And today, the topic is security. Brad sent me a text earlier this week. He said, "Hey, let's talk about security on the podcast this week."
Yeah.
I said, "Sure." So, Brad, what do you want to talk about?
Well, I want to talk about let's not talk about security best practices, although that will certainly come up as things that we talk about. But I'm just kind of curious about your experience in as a CTO. What have you seen as sort of the various cultures around security and technologies around securities and ways leaders we can make sure we're doing the right thing? And what's the role of the CTO in security?
That is a great question. Well, I think the first thing what one needs to ask is, does the security function, like the information security function, roll up into the CTO? Well, let's, for the purposes of this conversation, assume that it does. In some companies, it's separate because some people see that's a little bit like the fox guarding the henhouse, if that makes sense. And so I would say the first role of the CTO in security is mindset or attitude or culture, the tone at the top, right? What is the tone that the head of engineering is setting? And before I go any further, let me say this. I am not a security expert. I don't have any of the security certifications or anything like that. But I have worked at 3 or 4 different companies where security for different reasons was important, either because we had scale where it mattered to be secure. We had external partners who wanted some sort of trust that their data was being handled properly, or we were working where you and I worked together in healthcare, and we had confidential patient data. So I'm not an expert, but I've been around it, and I've had to lead a security function on a few different occasions. So step number 1, tone at the top. And I would say tone at the top goes both ways. And what I mean by both ways is toward one's own engineering team, setting the tone for the engineering team, but also out and up towards the senior leadership. That it has to, as a CTO, it's your job to set that tone and educate and train and guide in both directions. Because I often say most people don't know what we do inside of engineering, and they really don't know what we do inside of engineering when it comes to security.
Yeah.
But they will know. They will know when there's a problem.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny. As I realized as I asked you that question and you started answering it, I was like, maybe the better place for us to start. First of all, love your point about tone. 100% agree with that. Because I've seen places where, to your point, they don't care about it until all of a sudden it matters. Right? Like if you have a breach, everyone's going to care about security. But it probably was, it's probably, the breach probably occurred because of the tone. Like it's very likely that we had a lax security posture because we had a unclear tone or a clear tone that was security's not important, that probably led to the choices that ended up resulting in a breach. So
Yes.
Does that ring true to you or
that rings true? Let me tell you, I've been involved in what I would call 3 real security incidents. Okay, but only one was really a breach. So let me tell you about these 3 because I won't be revealing anything. One of them was when I was working at Rover. This was not a breach. It was a situation. Rover was a two-sided marketplace, so you had buyers and sellers who were communicating via messages. And we had, I can't remember if it was fake buyers defrauding sellers or fake sellers defrauding buyers, but there was people were getting defrauded through the system. So there was nothing about our technology that was broken, but it was to the end user, they felt like something was wrong. That was one thing. The second thing was at another company, not Rover. This was when I was at Dolly, which Dolly got acquired by TaskRabbit. We had an account credential stuffing attack. So this is where some rogue actor has found a database of usernames and passwords that's been leaked on the internet, and they come and try them on your website. And people who have used the same username and password on multiple websites, then they're able to get into that account and they're able to do stuff, right? Again, our system was working. Someone used a legitimate username and password
Yeah.
to access the system. Now, you could say, well, we didn't have two-factor authentication, which was true, and we then thereafter introduced two-factor authentication, and that solves that problem. The third actually was also at Dolly, and it was a real breach. Now, the breach predated my time there by a couple of years, but the consequence was thereafter. So what happened was we received an email from someone one day that said, "Hey, we have access to your systems, and we want a bunch of Bitcoin," right?
Oh no.
And yeah, that's right. Oh no. And we were able to diagnose that two key things here. They had gotten access to our systems through an insecure password. Somebody had a password like password 123, and that let them get in. And we were also able to diagnose that whoever this person was, had actually not been inside. To whatever extent they were able to show us proof that they really had been inside our system, but they had not been in our system for at least a year or two, based on the proof that they were showing us. They were showing us database schemas, and we were able to say, "Oh, we know when certain tables were added or deleted, and so this is the time frame when they were in." And the vector that they got in, that was a server that had this crappy password on it that had been out of commission for a long time. So those are that was the real incident that I was involved in. And I will tell you, you get real heart palpitations until you find out, oh, okay, they got in a while ago and they're not in right now. So at least the door was unlocked, but now it's locked. So
Well,
so that was a little scary.
and by the way, you just mentioned something. You used the I word, incident, and one of the things that
Mhm.
definitely is on my mind about security is one of the things about having a attitude of security and an attitude and sort of like a culture and systems that help you solve for security is, do you have a robust incident response process? Do you have a
Mhm.
documented incident response process? Have you practiced it? Have you had a chance to, work those muscles? And, do you have a culture that's good at incident response? Because certainly
Yes.
any incident that's a security incident is going to be the type of incident that's going to really lean on your culture of excellence and your high performance team dynamic, because
Yeah.
it's going to be stressful and there's going to be a lot of opportunity for finger pointing. And have you established a great quality of egoless, retrospective incident management, tight, team coordination? Do you have systems in place? Do you have systems in place for incident management in
Mhm.
general?
Yes. Now I'm able to describe these events succinctly, but at the time they're happening, I don't want to make it seem overly dramatic. There's bullets flying in every direction. I don't mean people are shooting each other. There's just a lot going on. You don't understand the situation. You're like, what's happening? Who's in our
Yeah.
system? And then you're talking to one of your people and they're like, wait, this EC2 instance, we don't even have this instance anymore.
Right.
And you're slowly unpeeling and like trying, getting an understanding. I forgot a fourth incident that I've been involved with. This was an internal embezzlement.
Oh, bye.
Yeah, this was a situation where, again,
No one will notice if we just take a penny per transaction.
kind of, it wasn't exactly like that. This was again at one of the market. I've worked at three marketplaces, so this is at one of the marketplaces I was at, and somebody there was a cadence. I don't remember exactly the rhythm, but let's just say it was once a week, where workers got paid, and there was like a cron job that paid these workers, and somebody inside the company who was figured out that they could insert rows into this table that did the payouts, and so it would pay them,
Mm,
and that there was no check and balance on
mm,
that. The only way we discovered it was at the end of the year, you have to issue
mm.
1099s for all these people. And the person who was doing that was just kind of spot checking and just noticed like unusual payments. Like either they were kind of large, or they didn't have, they would usually be, there was a piece of the ID of the person who, there was like a user ID, and they were like, but this isn't a real user ID. These are fake. Like what's going on? So if that person hadn't have been double checking,
You wouldn't have
we might
noticed.
have, we wouldn't have noticed. And then through quite a bit of investigation, we were able to figure out it was somebody internally. Um, and we got variety, you get lawyers involved in that stuff. And
Mhm.
uh, they, not to say it made it better, but this is what the lawyer told us. Actually, this will be good. This will be a fun story to tell. He said, look, in my experience, we were able to get ourselves in touch with this person who dealt with this kind of problem. They were a former federal prosecutor who was now in private practice, and we were just like, what should we do, right? Like, do we call the cops? Like, how do you handle this situation? And he said, look, in my experience, when somebody is stealing from their company, they're having they're having money problems. And those money problems are coming from a divorce, gambling, or drugs.
Yeah.
Okay, that's probably most likely that's what you have going on here. And that's what was going on. We had somebody who had gambling losses and was trying to cover it up from his spouse.
Yeah.
And this is kind of how he
Yeah.
was doing that.
So
Anyway,
back to security.
yeah.
So
Okay, so tone at the top.
yeah, tone at the top, obviously. What else?
I'll offer two frameworks to our listeners. And I'll say one thing overarching both of these frameworks. And I say this to people all the time. Lots of times, people, when they go to address these frameworks, they're just trying to check boxes.
Yeah.
And this is a tone at the top thing. I always try to say, look, what's actually important, I don't care what this framework says. I don't care what, the control that we're supposed to put in place is. What actually matters is that we're more secure. That's what
Right.
matters. And in fact, I just had this conversation yesterday with the general counsel at TaskRabbit. He asked me the question. We were talking about some security thing where there's a little bit of risk, and he's like, he was trying to understand, Scott, are we just trying to check the box here, or is this a real thing to make us more secure? I was like, no, I want to do this because it will make us more secure. Like, I'm not doing this to just check the box. If you're doing it to check the box, you might as well not do it. Okay, so what are my two frameworks? One is a framework I invented, and then another one is real world. So here, what's the one I invented? Very simple, three stages. It's like a castle. You're the king of your castle, Brad.
Okay.
Secure the perimeter.
Okay.
Make sure nobody can get in. Is number one. Number two, make sure everybody who does get in, you know who they are. And number three, make sure the people who do get in can only go to the rooms of the castle that you let them go into.
Yeah. Minimum exposure. Minimum.
Yeah. So number one is, have yourself inside some sort of private network and have all the outside of that network locked down real tight. Number two is, don't have shared user accounts and stuff like that in your network. Everyone, have all that stuff on the surface. And number three is role-based access control. And if you do those things, and part of securing the perimeter is stuff like, all the different types of security things you can use, SSH keys and two-factor authentication and all that kind of stuff. And to me, like if you follow that framework, you're going to be pretty solid, right?
So I love it. That's all great stuff. I feel like that's really speaking to we haven't really talked about the code. So I feel
Oh yeah.
so 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 you're in the zone of the access to systems, access to information, controlling the humans that
Yes.
you know about, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think you're right. Like you're enumerating like all the best practices that we all hear, right? Like you
Mhm.
know, actual authentication of the person who they are, who they say they are, and that's like quality passwords and two-factor authentication and appropriately secure systems. Don't ever write your own cryptography, right? Like
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
and and then uh, role-based access is that's like clear. Like we really need to
Mhm.
know that it's you, Brad, and we need to know that Brad has access to do these things, right? As opposed to all of dev uses dev and just logs in with root, and the root password is password.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And of course, modern systems like all of our cloud providers, all of them have, user account management systems that allow us to do really fine-grained controls there. And I think that I'll just say like, uh, because I work so often with startups and growth stage companies, right? Like one of the things that often you find is like in the early days, you're just go, 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 and you're taking shortcuts all over the place, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
you and I, like we show up after the fact, right? And maybe shortcuts have already been taken. Maybe it's been years of shortcuts have been taken.
Mhm.
And so you've got a little bit of a figuring out what your exposures are can be. You kind of come to it late, right? Um, and I feel like that mistake of maybe I just turned on a bunch of privileges. Maybe I've got these agents that do this work for me, that I've got keys stored all over the place, right? Especially in today's now this is going to pivot into the software conversation, right? Because a lot of times our software is built on privileged components talking to other components and
Mhm.
negotiating privilege at the software layer, right?
Mhm.
I kind of threw out a couple things there. One, we've got this like often we're confronted with this legacy of choices that were made that we may need to come and clean up. And then I'm also sort of starting to pull at the thread of what about software security? So, what are your thoughts on those two topics?
I got thoughts on those two topics. I want to say one thing. I want to finish a previous thought and then get into this. I talked about two frameworks.
Oh yeah, you said your framework, which is the
That's my personal little
what's your
framework, and it didn't talk about software. And I'm going to come back to that. The other is these standard frameworks like SOC 2, ISO 9000 or whatever. And the one that I've found is the best to start with, and by best I mean just easiest to start with, is called CIS, Center for Information Security. They have uh, what they call implementation groups. So they kind of give you, there's a lot of there's like 200 controls in this thing. And they sort of say, okay, we'll do these 50 first,
yeah.
right? So it's a good starter kit. And so that's one of the reasons I like it. And I also like it because it's a little more prescriptive. It sort of just says, do this thing, right? A lot of the frameworks that are out there are more like uh, guidance, like you shall have some way to ensure that people log in securely,
Right.
right? And so when this gets to your question about you're coming in a little bit later. I tend to start with that IG1. I'm sorry, CIS, and then you got the implementation group
Yep.
one. It just provides a roadmap because you're overwhelmed. You got so much. You walk into a scenario, you're like, oh my God, there's no security here at all. What do we even do? And it just provides I mean, I hate to reuse the word framework, but a framework or a roadmap for like, okay, well, we just work our way down this
Yeah.
checklist and one by one do all these things. And I have a specific philosophy there, which is it's better to go shallow and broad and keep on doing that as opposed to you can take one of these controls and you can go really, really deep on it, right? It's better to get a simple little lock on every door
Yeah.
and then come back and put a better lock on each door and then a better lock on each door. And as opposed to spending all your time to making sure door number one is rock solid, but doors 2 through 20 are wide open.
So for people's benefit, I just pulled up the CIS IG1 framework, and I'll just like read through kind of their various controls they have, just as an example to your point about how you
Yeah.
could go deep on these or you could go broad. So like control one is inventory and control of enterprise assets. You can imagine how like Yeah. Do I have my inventory of all my control of my enterprise assets? Inventory and
Right.
control of software assets.
Right.
Data protection. That's control 3. Control 4, secure configuration of enterprise assets and software. Control 5, account management, right? Do I have accounts? Control 6, account control management, access control management. So that's the roles-based control, right? Control 7, continuous vulnerability management. Control 8, audit log management. Control 9, email and web browser protections. And there's 18 of these. I'm going to stop here at 9, but malware, data recovery, network infrastructure, network monitoring, security awareness, service provider management, application software security, incident response management, and pen testing. So yeah, like you can imagine that all of those you can go each of those you could go super deep on, but you're going to way more benefit if you do something for everyone.
And those are actually called control families. And within each of those, then they have many controls
I think
underneath there. I
they
think the
call them
total,
safeguards maybe underneath or something like that.
I think they do call them safeguards. Yeah. I believe there are about 150 total controls or safeguards in that framework in those 18 families. And then they've broken those up into those 3 layers, implementation group or IG 1, 2, 3. Yeah. And so my strategy is to go shallow and get a little everything, just like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. You paint one coat and then you just go back over and paint another coat. And you keep on painting coats endlessly because by the time you get to the one end of the Golden Gate Bridge, the other end is already faded. You need to start over.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we talked about, we wanted to get into software.
Yeah.
So 2 thoughts about this. I first went to humans, and it's because I was influenced once. The first job I had where I had to do security, we hired someone, and this was a guy who came out of some bigger companies. I think he'd been at Walmart and some other places. And my inclination as an engineer was to start with the software. And he was telling me, you got to start with user access. And I didn't understand why. And he's like, well, look, I've been doing this a while. And the reality is, most of your problems come because a human made an error.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And, it's not as frequent that someone finds some clever way to exploit the software that you wrote. It's much more the social engineering that people do to get someone's password out of them, or that someone used a weak password. And then when they used a weak password and somebody got in, you didn't have the roles and set the right way. So I learned that from him. And then that sort of changed my mind. My mindset was always like, oh, protect against SQL injection attacks and stuff like that. That's where I sort of started out in this journey. And then I learned like, oh, it turns out most of the problems are human. And then those 4 incidents that I told you
All
about,
human.
all human, right?
Yeah.
And so, and in fact, I've been at some companies where we have done, we've phished our own employees. That's when you do something to try and get an employee to give you their password. We phished our own employees as part of our training. And one place I had 26% of the employees gave up their password.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this is crazy.
Yeah.
Right. And this was the classic, hey, we need you to go take this survey or something, click this link, and the person clicks the link, and we set this whole thing. It was a page that looked like you had to log into Google, but the URL was like Google spelled wrong or something like that.
Right.
And then they typed in their username and password to log into Google, and boom, we had it. So it's again comes back to that tone at the top and setting the culture. Okay, but then you come back to the software. Well, let's talk about the software stuff. My experience, and this is not my biggest area of expertise. And by the way, it is all changing with AI. I mean, it's like a whole new game. The things I lean on are, one is coming back to that perimeter. Is your network set up securely? Basically, if you're running a web app, are you just locked down to port 80? Right? Do you have all these other port 443? But like, is that 443? Is that your SSL port? I can't remember. Other people remember that stuff these days better than I do. But to just have it locked down. Remember I told you about that incident we had where there was this one EC2 instance with a lousy password. That was at a company that was not using a network, and all of their instances were on the public internet.
I see. They didn't have like a
You
any
know,
kind of a they didn't have any kind of an application load balancer or any kind of a
they had nothing protecting it. So they had this one container that someone had set up, probably to experiment with something. And then that person set a weak password, and then it was out there and someone found it. Who knows how they found it? So that's one piece. And then the other piece is standards based. Like, you know, I've been at companies that have had their own homegrown authentication systems. And it's just like, what are you doing these days, man?
yeah.
Like, we should not be you unless you're Okta or Auth0, like you're not getting paid to have good security to make your own security system. So like rely on a third party for this kind of stuff. And whether it's all the stuff that matters, which is databases and money and users, like that's all stuff where you can find whether it's you know open source or commercial systems to use where you got a community of people to help you there.
So I love that point, and I think that's a great segue actually into one of the other topics that has become a little bit we've become a little bit more aware of, and that is supply chain attacks,
Yeah.
right? And in fact, we just had one recently. React had a supply chain attack with Next.js and React. So it's like pretty big, common, large open source products that end up with you know a significant vulnerability in a supply chain that a lot of people so there are best practices for making
Hmm.
sure you're ready for that kind of a thing, right? Like
Well,
software inventory, like do you really
mhm.
know what software is being used to build your software, right? With NPM packages these days, it's just like so easy to be like, oh, I need a new, like what was the thing that was like, uh, there was one that was not even an attack, but there was like a famous one like a couple years ago where this guy had this open source package that was for colors, and everyone like used that color package, and then one day it was just like he took it down. And it was like no one's software could build anymore because
Right.
he got rid of the package.
Well, you talk about NPM, you type in NPM, I can't remember the words for NPM at the moment, but like NPM install color package, and
Yeah,
then you watch it sit there and install 100 dependencies,
exactly.
and you're just thinking to yourself, what is this stuff?
Right.
So, okay, I said there were two things on the software side, but I fibbed, and I actually have a third thing on the software side.
Yeah.
These system, NPM audit in the NPM space will tell you uh, where your packages are at in terms of
Yep.
security, vulnerability, stuff like that. Make that a part of your build. And if you got a critical or if you got a high, don't let it deploy.
Yeah.
Set an SLA for your team. It says, look, any high vulnerability. This is how I like to set these SLAs. I like to have. I'm going to go deep here for a second. When I say deep, a little bit of a tangent. Whether it's a bug or a vulnerability or a performance issue, any of these kinds of things. Here's how I think about it. You got critical, high, medium, low. Critical is actually you have one on top of that. You've got the top one, which is above critical. Let's call it red alert. Red alert is stop, drop, and roll. Stop what you are doing now and work on this thing until it is fixed day or night. Okay. Critical is, hey, break your current sprint to work on this. You had some stuff in your sprint, pull this thing into your sprint and disrupt your sprint to make it happen. High is this needs to go in the next sprint. Medium is this needs to go in the next sprint or the sprint thereafter. And low is you need to do it within the next 90 days. And when it comes to low, if you don't do it in 90 days, we're just going to close this ticket. We've decided that if it's not important for us to do it in 90 days, we're just going to get rid of this ticket. So those are priorities. You can use those priorities for bugs, for performance, for vulnerabilities. So step two there is for each of those categories, you decide on criteria. Now, vulnerabilities is the easiest because something like NPM audit is telling you,
Yeah.
and you can just map it, right? Oh, we got a high severity vulnerability that's going to be put into our bug system, our ticketing system, Jira, be marked as a high priority, and that'll just go in the next sprint. And then it's really easy to build a report in Jira, which shows you things that are out of SLA. And as a manager, you can just manage against that.
By the way, I love what you're saying here. I want to pull on the thread though that I think is you're you're ending up hinting at, which is, and you mentioned this at the beginning where you said, "Hey, you're not just setting the tone to the engineers and the teams below you, but you're also setting the tone up and out to your peers and to the other leadership team." And I think that that is hinting at a really common thing where how do you change the philosophy, or how do you help manage your stakeholders into thinking of security as more than just a cost center? Because certainly when you say, "Hey, I've got these tickets," and you just use some great language like critical, we stop what we're doing to it breaks our sprint. We work on it. Hi, we got to get it into this next sprint, right? Like you're making statements that the average product owner, if they don't have a security mindset and don't believe in security mindset, they're going to, they might bristle at the idea that you're saying these things trump their feature ideas.
They do bristle. And let me tell you, they bristle in two ways. Um, I mentioned that you can apply this also to bugs and to
Performance.
yes, product managers can really bristle because when you start to say, hey, any endpoint that's slower than, let's say, 500 milliseconds, that's going to be a high priority bug. And anything that's slower than 1,000 milliseconds is high priority. And anything that's slower than 500 is medium priority. Then they're going to say that's filling up their sprint. And when you say, hey, anything that's, we're going to set some standards for what's a high priority bug and a medium priority. And they say, well, gosh, if we set those standards, my sprints are going to get filled up with my sprints. Of course, the sprints are going to get filled up with all these bugs. And do you know what I'm going to say? I'm going to say, well, then we need to do better QA, don't we? Because we're letting all these things out. So, but coming back to the security point, I would say I try to impress upon them a few things. One is that we don't want to have a breach. A breach is incredibly expensive. I've done some cost analysis on some of these breaches I talked to you about before. And when you start to get the lawyers involved, and I've never been in one of those cases where we've had to disclose to our customers, but you've received a letter in the mail just like I have,
Yeah.
which says so and so company was breached. I mean, these are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in expense.
If not
And so
hundreds of
that's
millions of
real,
dollars.
right? So that's real. The other thing I try to impress upon them is we have to have a culture of maintenance because when we get behind on these things, it's not a hole we can really ever dig out of.
Yeah.
So, I mean, okay, do you want to blow off this high severity vulnerability a sprint? Okay, blow it off a sprint. But if you blow them off 6 months, then you're going to have 20 of them, and then it's going to take us 6 sprints to get it figured out, right? So we have to just always stay up with it. It's just a cost of doing business. And the other thing I try to impress upon people is we don't put it on our balance sheets as businesses, but security is an asset or a liability on that balance sheet. And all those vulnerabilities that aren't fixed are really, you could convert them to dollars and put them as a liability on.
Yeah, they're almost like what John Helm talked about. They're like naked calls, right? They're
Yeah. Let's assume if one of those high severity vulnerabilities is exploited, it's worth $500,000. Let's assume that one out of 100 of those is going to happen. So that means that it's $50,000. That's a $50,000 liability on average on your sheet, on your balance sheet. And so we can decide as a business if we want to carry those risks. And lots of business people will say yes, but the first time they go through a real incident, then they will regret it. So I try to do that. And then the other piece, and this is the last thing I'll say, is when you set it up as just create that culture of, well, it's a high and we put it in the next sprint, then it just becomes a non-topic any longer. No, it's a little rough at first to get people to buy into it. But once you get them to buy into it, then nobody thinks about it anymore. It's just a course matter of doing
Yeah, I
things.
think that's fair. I also think, and this will, I kind of opened the door a little bit to the question of like, what do you do when you kind of arrive and it's, and you've got like a legacy of problems. But I'll just take a moment here. If you have a, if you are lucky enough to be starting from scratch, then this is something that you can build into your processes to be completely automated. Like you mentioned, you just make a CI/CD rule that like requires that there are no vulnerabilities. And the current state of the art in static analysis is really quite good. And so, you have all these different things. You with like, Dependbot can tell you if you've got vulnerabilities in your dependencies. You can be running vulnerability scans. You can be running static analysis against your code base to see that you're accidentally doing, stuff like, being vulnerable to SQL injection or being vulnerable to, um, you know, API injection of various sorts. It's like the static analysis tools are pretty damn good for that stuff right now. And so set it up as part of your build process to just not let you check in code that has the problem.
Exactly right. The build process, and I'm a big fan of something called danger system, something like that, which is a way to build rules into your build process and your deploy process. It is really where you can put your guardrails, right? Whether it's everything from like don't deploy a critical kind of thing, or no PRs bigger than 300 lines, or no PRs after 4:30 on no pushes on after 4:30 on Friday.
Right.
All that you can put all those rules in your build system, and when you build a culture that does that, then it's basically a straight line from incident retrospective to let's put a rule in the build to prevent that from happening again.
Yeah, totally. Now, you also mentioned the notion of checking boxes and things like that, and I'll just make a quick. I'm not going to give a sales pitch for this product, but I will tell you, I just recently started working with the product called Vanta, and Vanta is essentially an automated system for compliance regimes. And so it actually, I'm using it with one of my clients to do SOC 2 compliance, and it so far so good. It's a pretty powerful system. So you actually hook it up to your GitHub and you hook it up to your Jira ticketing system, and you can hook it up to your various cloud providers, and it does analysis for you to see if you're meeting all the controls. Um,
Mhm.
and I think that, and so for example, a good example of this is, it will analyze your controls around your logins and your credentials. Do you have appropriate, does everybody who has an account in GitHub, are they a mapped person on your accounts in you know, your Google Workspace? Is there a correlation there? And do you have, checks there? These are examples of the types of controls that, would be in your CIS, IG1, but a tool like Vanta, and there's probably others out there that do the same thing. I actually, in fact, know there are others out there that do the same thing. They actually automate that control checking, and I think that makes it possible for um,
Makes it a lot easier.
makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, let me offer two other tools that are out there. Three other tools that are out there actually. We use a tool called Wiz, which does a lot of that. We use a tool called Drata, which is a competitor to Vanta. And then built into AWS, for any of you who are using AWS, and I would assume that Azure and Google Cloud Platform have the same thing. Within AWS, it's called AWS Security Hub. And you just go in there and you say, run a check again, use this framework to run a check for me. And they've got, you know, SOC 2 and HIPAA and you name it, they've got them all in there. And it'll just run through whatever AWS setup you have and tell you how you're doing against that. Oh, here you've got this bucket exposed publicly. Oh, here you've got this container that's not part of a VPC, et cetera. And so it gives you, then that's your kind of your roadmap for getting started on what to fix. Let me offer one other framing. And I'm going to say this is what I'm about to say is a little bit in evolution in my mind. I used to frame it like this. In most of our companies, you have to think about, we actually have two technology environments. We have what we call our production environment, which is often in AWS or Azure or Google Cloud or something like that, which is like our web service that we serve people with. And then we have our corporate environment,
Mm.
which is like our work in our laptops, our workstations, our Google Workspace, or whatever you use, all those kinds of things. And so you have to cover both. And I tend to, when I look at these control frameworks, I tend to apply it separately to both of them because it's easy to say, okay, we'll do user access control. Oh, sweet, we got AWS sorted out. And I was like, okay, well, that's only half it. You got this stuff over here. Where I've started to evolve in my mind of that framing a little bit lately is I actually think there's a third environment. it's a portion which bridges the two, and it's the data environment, right? Is that we often have data coming from our production environment or data coming from our corporate environment that is going into, some sort of data warehouse kind of thing, which is a third space. And sometimes you own that third space and it lives like in your cloud place,
Yeah.
or your cloud place. That's funny. Your cloud environment, or sometimes it's a third party like a Snowflake or something like that. But it's kind of this third piece that you have to think about that stuff as well. CIS does have a control family about data. But again, I tend to think about the control families are the rows of the different controls, and then you have three columns: your corporate, your production, your data. And the only reason I do that is to help people think more clearly about all the areas we have to
All the
cover,
gaps.
so that we're covering all the ground. And that's kind of the three main areas that tend to cover it all.
Yeah, totally.
We've gone on a huge tangent from software. I don't know how we got from software to talking about a control environment matrix.
Here's how I tie those things together in my mind is that typically, as CTOs, right, you're typically working for an organization that is building software. And
Mm.
I think that you're right that it's easy to get hyper focused on that part of it and to leave out, like your colleague said, the human factor, right? Or to leave out the corporate factor, or to leave out the, like a good example of this would be like, oh, um, if I've let's say I'm doing a good job of not checking in secrets into my code base, yay me, but my developers have, secrets on their development machines that, are used for their development environment, right? Well, now that means that that machine and that individual corporate user is an attack vector, right?
Yeah.
And so you could say, "Oh, I'm doing such a great job of doing the software part securely," but then if you've missed coverage on the attack vector of the humans that work for your company, then you're not really it doesn't matter that you did all that work to secure the software.
That's right. We were talking about the software side, and I didn't think of it, but I should have now that I hear what you said. One of the most basic things on the software side is a secrets manager.
Yeah.
If you're not using, y- you know, one password and AWS Secrets Manager or whatever you want to use, we use a system called Doppler at our company. Like, you're just missing one of the low-hanging fruits for keeping things more secure.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a lot of different choices out there you can use. One of the things I did run into, I was at a company where we had a lot of smart engineers, and they often wanted to use, the best tool for the job. And so there was some secret manager they were using. When they started to put in a secrets manager, they started to put in this really good one, right? But it didn't have the ease of use and developer tooling around it. So then it just took developers a long time. And
So I
so
know what
they just
happened.
skipped it.
They skipped it and they put the secrets right in the
Yeah.
code.
Yeah. So this is one of the cases where I think you really do have to think about what is your engineering or your developer workflow,
Yeah.
because you want it to be such that it needs to be the cost benefit equation. It has to be easier to use the secret manager than to not, because if it isn't, the people won't do it.
It's so funny you
And
say that. I literally just heard a podcast. It was with a company that's basically working on using AI to basically do dynamic pen testing against all these different surface areas that you're talking about. And this is the founder of that company is very much like a longtime security expert, and was telling a story about a time that he was working consulting with a CISO that basically said, "Oh, I want my secret manager to be really, really hard to use." And he was like, "What? Why would you do that?" And he's like, "Well, because I would like to try to encourage the developers to simply not use secrets, to come up with solutions that don't require secrets." And he was like, "That's not going to work, buddy. Like, it's not going to
yeah,
work. Like, your developers are going to, I mean, you can't avoid secrets. Like, all of the tooling that we use nowadays, all the API packages that we have to use, they're always going to have secrets involved in them. And so, to your point, if you and I think, by the way, I think we could rewind this to the very top first comment that you made, which is it's all about the tone that you set, right? And so, if you set a tone that says, like, look, security matters, and of course you're going to have software that talks to software, and therefore you're going to have credentials for software, and that means you're going to have secrets, and that matters. And we're not going to not do that. We're going to do that right, and that matters.
Mm.
And then you have developers who will at least voice the concern, like, "Hey, I'm trying to use the secrets manager, and it's really hard to use. Can we find a better secrets manager that has better dev tooling, as opposed to like, fuck it, I'm just going to go around the policy."
Yeah. Here's the last thought I'll share. I mean, maybe we'll have more to discuss, but it seems like for me, this is the last thought that I have. If you follow good security practices, you follow the CIS framework or the SOC 2 framework or whatever, you do these things, you're just following good software engineering
Agreed.
practices. And if you follow them, it is work to set them up. That matrix I was just describing of your control families on going down the rows and your environments. So let's say you got 18 control families and you got 3 environments. You got, what is that, 56? Did I get that right? Whatever, you got a lot. That's like 56. It isn't 56, 3 times 18. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, let's just say it's 56 for the purposes of my illustration. That's 56 projects you have to do, right? And if there's 3 implementation groups, that's actually 160
Big,
something
a big
projects that
number.
you have to do. It's a big, so it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to set it up. But when you do get it going, it actually greases the rails of your software engineering. It just makes things go more smoothly because a lot of getting it set up is having, procedures and processes for how something gets done. And so you're just streamlining the work that you're doing. And so I see a lot of people see security in opposition to software engineering. I see security as, um, a accelerant or catalyst to software engineering. And actually, I said that was the last thing, but I'm going to say the last thing. This is going to be maybe the nerdiest thing I ever say on this podcast.
I'm
In all of our
I'm on
episodes,
edge.
it's almost spiritual. Information security, and specifically information security frameworks, is the grease that makes capitalism go. It's what allows individuals and businesses to trust each other.
Mhm.
And if we didn't trust each other, we would have a harder time transacting with each other. And I trust that this dollar I'm going to give you is worth $1, right? I trust that this data I'm going to give you, you're going to keep secure. And if all that stuff didn't happen, if all those trust frameworks weren't there, you would only do business with people who you could see and shake their hand, and think of
Yeah.
how different our world would be. And so in a certain way, I have almost like, it's to me, it's almost like, uh, I'm a little bit in awe of it, whether it's our security frameworks we're talking about, or you got what was that one having to do with public companies that came out after Enron?
Yeah.
SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley.
Sarbanes-Oxley.
Yet, or you got HIPAA with your health information, you got PCI with your credit card information, all this stuff. All these are the things that allow all of the actors, meaning all the people and businesses in the economy, to trust each other.
Yeah.
And trust is what makes the whole thing go.
I, I think the way to sum this up, actually, Scott, rewinding to the whole, we basically like summarize the whole podcast as, um, trust is trust is fundamental to being able to be in business,
Mhm.
and the tone that we need to set as leaders is that establishing good engineering practices will establish good security practices, which therefore allow us to implement the trust and to demonstrate the trust that makes us an effective business.
Yeah.
And I don't think that you could say it any better than that.
No, he said it well.
There you go. Well, this was fun. I think we covered a lot of ground. I think we talked about some important things. obviously there's way more that we could talk about it. Like I think that like this is right there in the mix of like what do you do when you show up and there's been, you know, a fair amount of technical debt or security debt, and then you're going to try to clean it up. And you touched on many of those topics. Um, uh, but I love the idea of if you can start from if you get to start with a clean slate, then for sure put security in place right away. Just make it part of your just make it
Hmm.
your culture, make it part of your engineering practices, and your life's gonna be so much easier.
Agreed. And Brad, I'm going to go a little bit out on a limb here. I don't think you'll object to what I'm about to say. But for any of the 40 people who are listening to this, because our listenership increased by one person this week, Brad,
Yeah, there we go. Nice.
I would be happy to, and I think you would be happy to also take a call with anybody. If you're struggling with this at your company and need some guidance,
Yeah.
I'd be happy to help out. In part because I think good security serves us all as an industry. You know, if all of our websites and all of our mobile apps and all of our software systems were flaky, nobody would trust this industry and we'd all be out of jobs and so on and so forth. And so I think it's good for us as an industry. And
And I think that's a great way to sum it up. But gosh darn it, you made me think of one last thing, and I'm gonna say this, and then we're gonna sum this up. Just because a breach happens, that's not the end of the story, right? Like we said earlier, like having high quality teams that understand how to respond to incidents, that's what that's like
mhm,
such an important part of this. And so, you know, a part of that tone is like security matters. And also, we are professionals such that when something goes wrong, we deal with it in a professional manner.
absolutely. Now, there's a whole topic we didn't discuss, and there's another podcast from this. And we actually should find the right guest for it because I'm not the right person. AI is changing everything.
AI is changing everything.
You got data getting exposed in ways that we never had it exposed before. You got agents crawling around your environment. I was just talking to someone this week. He was telling me how he basically gave some sort of AI agent root access to it. There was a problem in their environment. He basically gave this agent root access and said, "Can you help me figure this out?" And it figured it out. And he was like, it was amazing and so scary at the same time. Right.
Totally.
And so there's this whole new world out there that, to be honest, I don't even have a concept of how to cope with. Um, but there are going to be agents that do the wrong, like I've heard of them already, agents deleting databases, right? And all this
Yeah.
stuff. And it comes back to that second plank of, I actually don't know what it comes back to, but that's a whole other podcast we're going to have to talk about.
All right. We've beaten this one. This one's a good one. We covered this one. Let's wrap it up with tone is what matters, trust is what matters, and if you set the right tone for security and trust, it's just the same as good engineering practices. All right. Well, what do we say?
Smash that subscribe button, tell all of your friends, and leave us a great review. Say these are the best, this is the best podcast ever. Better than
Right.
Joe Rogan or Mark Maron or any of those podcasters out there. And
All right.
also you can tell all your friends that you knew about it first.
You knew about it first. That's right. All right. Thanks, Scott. It was great talking to you. We'll talk to you next week.
See you, Brad.
All right. Bye. This episode of How Many CTOs Does It Take podcast was edited by Saffron Hefta-Gaub. Our theme song was AI generated by Brad. Please follow us on all the social media platforms at How Many CTOs Pod. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, X, TikTok, and Patreon, or at our website at howmanyctospod.com. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. Thanks for listening.